She was just finishing her shift when he stumbled in, suit soaked, heart shattered, and too drunk to stand upright. But when the black waitress helped the millionaire get home, she had no idea. He would change her life forever. The rain hammered against the windows of Murphy's diner, like angry fists demanding entry, each drop catching the neon light that flickered intermittently above the entrance. Deja Washington wiped down the same counter for the third time in 10 minutes, her dark eyes scanning the nearly empty restaurant as the clock on the wall ticked past 11:47 p.m. The scent of coffee and grease hung heavy in the air, mixed with the metallic smell of the storm outside. She tucked a strand of her natural hair behind her ear, feeling the familiar ache in her feet from another 14-hour shift. The tips tonight had been measly, barely enough to cover her bus fare home, let alone help with her grandmother's mounting medical bills. Hello, my dearest family. Before we begin, let us take a moment to lift each other in prayer. Heavenly Lord, please watch over everyone watching this story today, guide their steps, and fill their hearts with love and hope. Amen. Family, you are not just subscribers. You are my strength and my inspiration to keep creating. To those who just joined, welcome home. Kindly subscribe to the channel. Leave a comment, and let me know where you are watching from. I would love to meet you. Every story I share is a piece of me, my late nights, my dedication, my heart. When you leave too soon, it feels as though that sacrifice is unseen. Please stay with me until the very end. I love you all deeply. Now, let's begin our story. At 26, Deja had perfected the art of surviving on 3 hours of sleep and sheer determination. But tonight felt different. Tonight, exhaustion clung to her like a second skin. The bell above the door chimed, and Deja looked up to see a figure stumbling through the entrance. The man was tall, probably in his early 30s, with disheveled dark hair and an expensive suit that had seen better days. His white shirt was partially unbuttoned, his tie hung loosely around his neck, and he moved with the unsteady gait of someone who had spent the evening drowning sorrows in whiskey. "We're about to close," Deja called out, but her voice carried more concern than annoyance. There was something about the way he stood there, swaying slightly, that reminded her of her younger brother Marcus during his darkest days. The man looked up, and Deja saw eyes that were strikingly blue but clouded with pain and alcohol. "Please," he said, his voice rough and desperate. I need somewhere to sit for a moment." Deja glanced at the clock again, then at her manager Jerry, who was counting the till in the back office. Against her better judgment, she found herself nodding. "Take a seat at the counter. I'll get you some coffee." As he stumbled toward the nearest stool, Deja noticed the way his hands shook as he tried to steady himself. His expensive watch caught the light, a Rolex that probably cost more than she made in 6 months. Yet despite his obvious wealth, there was something broken about him, something that tugged at the part of her heart that had always been too soft for her own good. "Rough night?" she asked gently, setting a steaming cup of black coffee in front of him. He looked up at her with those piercing blue eyes, and for a moment, Deja felt like he was seeing straight through to her soul. "You could say that," he murmured, wrapping his hands around the warm mug. "Actually, it's been a rough decade." Deja had learned to read people during her years of waitressing. The lonely hearts, the broken dreams, the souls searching for something they couldn't name. But this man was different. Beneath the expensive clothes and the scent of top-shelf liquor, she sensed a depth of pain that matched her own. "I'm Deja," she said, extending her hand across the counter. He stared at her hand for a moment, as if he'd forgotten what human kindness looked like. "Alexander," he replied, his voice barely above a whisper. Alexander Sterling. The name meant nothing to Deja, but she noticed how he said it, like it was both a burden and a shield. She watched as he took a tentative sip of coffee, his movements careful and deliberate despite his intoxicated state. "Where are you headed tonight, Alexander?" Deja asked, refilling his cup without being asked. He let out a bitter laugh. That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? He looked around the diner, taking in the cracked vinyl booths and the flickering fluorescent lights. Honestly, I don't know. I was supposed to be at some charity gala, smiling and pretending everything was perfect. Instead, I ended up at a bar, then another bar then. He gestured vaguely at the diner. Deja noticed the way his shoulders sagged, as if he was carrying the weight of the world. Well, you're safe here, she said simply. This place has seen its share of lost souls. Something in her tone made Alexander look up sharply. And what about you? Are you a lost soul too? The question caught Deja off guard. She was used to deflecting, to focusing on others while keeping her own struggles hidden. But there was something about the way he asked, without judgment, with genuine curiosity, that made her consider answering honestly. Aren't we all? She said finally, offering him a small smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Outside, the storm continued its relentless assault on the city. Deja glanced toward the window, watching the way the rain distorted the streetlights into abstract paintings of color and light. She thought about her grandmother at home, probably lying awake worrying about the bills they couldn't pay, about the medication they couldn't afford, about the future that seemed to grow dimmer with each passing day. You know what I think? Alexander said suddenly, his voice clearer now, as if the coffee was beginning to work its magic. I think we're all just trying to find our way home. Deja felt something shift in her chest, a recognition, a connection she hadn't expected. And where is home for you, Alexander Sterling? He was quiet for a long moment, staring into his coffee as if it held the answers to all of life's questions. I thought I knew, he said finally. I had it all mapped out, the perfect life, the perfect future. But tonight, I realized I've been living in a house of cards, and it's all come crashing down. There was raw honesty in his voice that made Deja's heart ache. She had seen plenty of wealthy people in her time, but she had never seen one who looked so fundamentally lost. Want to talk about it? She asked, even though Jerry was starting to turn off lights in the back. Alexander looked up at her, and for the first time since he'd walked through the door, Deja saw something other than pain in his eyes. She saw surprise, as if he couldn't believe someone, especially someone who didn't know him, would care enough to ask. But before he could answer, the lights flickered ominously, and Deja heard Jerry's heavy footsteps approaching. She looked at Alexander, this mysterious, broken man who had stumbled into her world, and made a decision that would change everything. Listen, she said quietly, leaning closer across the counter. I need to close up, but you're in no condition to be wandering around the city alone. Let me help you get home. Alexander's eyes widened, and Deja saw something flicker across his face. Surprise, gratitude, and something else she couldn't quite identify. You don't even know me, he said. No, Deja agreed, but I know what it's like to need help and not know where to find it. As she spoke, Deja had no idea that this simple act of kindness would set in motion a chain of events that would not only transform her own life, but reveal secrets that would shake the very foundations of everything she thought she knew about the world, and about herself. Jerry's heavy footsteps echoed through the diner as he approached the counter, his keys jingling in his weathered hand. Deja, we need to lock up. You know the rules about staying past midnight. Deja looked at Alexander, who was struggling to focus on Jerry's words. The coffee had helped, but he was still far from sober. She made a quick decision that surprised even herself. Jerry, this is Alexander. He's a friend of mine, and I'm going to help him get home safely, she said, her voice steady despite the lie. You go ahead and lock up. I'll make sure everything's secure. Jerry studied Alexander with the practiced eye of someone who had seen every type of person stumble through the diner's doors. After a moment, he nodded. Be careful, Deja, and make sure you get home safe too. As Jerry disappeared into the back office, Deja turned her attention back to Alexander. In the dim light of the diner, she could see him more clearly now. Despite his disheveled appearance, there was something aristocratic about his features, Sharp cheekbones, a strong jawline, and those penetrating blue eyes that seemed to hold depths of untold stories. "Why are you helping me?" Alexander asked, his voice softer now, more vulnerable than before. Deja paused, considering the question. The truth was complicated, rooted in a lifetime of experiences that had shaped her into someone who couldn't walk away from another person's pain. "My grandmother always told me that we're all connected," she said finally. "That helping someone else is really helping yourself, even if you don't understand how at the time." Alexander's expression shifted, and Deja caught a glimpse of something that looked like wonder. "Your grandmother sounds like a wise woman." "She is," Deja replied, her voice tinged with both love and worry. "She raised me after my parents died in a car accident when I was 12. Been working double shifts for months, trying to keep up with her medical bills. She's got diabetes, and the medication costs." She trailed off, realizing she had shared more than she intended. "I'm sorry," Alexander said, and the sincerity in his voice caught Deja off guard. "That must be incredibly difficult." Deja shrugged, a gesture that had become second nature when discussing her struggles. "Life's not easy for any of us, right? We all have our crosses to bear." Alexander studied her face, and Deja felt exposed under his gaze. "You're remarkable, you know that? Here you are, working yourself to the bone, worried about your grandmother, and you're still taking time to help a stranger." Heat rose to Deja's cheeks. She wasn't used to compliments, especially not from someone who looked like he'd stepped out of a magazine. "I'm just doing what anyone would do." "No," Alexander said firmly, reaching across the counter to gently touch her hand. "You're doing what you would do. There's a difference." The contact sent an unexpected jolt through Deja's system. His hand was warm, despite the cool night air, and she noticed how his fingers were long and elegant, like a pianist's. She pulled her hand back, but not before she saw something flicker in his eyes, a spark of connection that made her heart race. "Tell me about yourself, Alexander Sterling," she said, trying to regain her composure. "What brought you to Murphy's Diner at midnight on a Tuesday?" Alexander's face darkened, and Deja saw the walls go up immediately. "It's complicated," he said. "Most things worth talking about are," Deja replied gently. For a moment, Alexander seemed to wrestle with himself. Then, as if making a decision, he looked directly into her eyes. "I found out tonight that everything I thought I knew about my life was a lie. My business partner, my best friend since college, has been embezzling from our company for years. Not just stealing money, he's been using our charity foundation as a front for money laundering." Deja's eyes widened. That's terrible. What are you going to do?" "That's just it," Alexander said, running his hands through his hair. "I don't know. If I expose him, it'll destroy the foundation. We've helped thousands of people, built schools, funded scholarships, provided clean water to communities that desperately needed it. But if I don't expose him, I'm complicit in his crimes." "You're not complicit," Deja said firmly. "You didn't know." "But I should have known," Alexander replied, his voice heavy with self-recrimination. "I trusted him completely. I let him handle the financial side while I focused on the charitable work. I was so naive, so stupid." "You were trusting," Deja corrected. "There's a difference between being stupid and being betrayed by someone you loved." The word "loved" hung in the air between them, and Deja saw Alexander's face crumple slightly. "Marcus was like a brother to me. We started Sterling Foundation together 5 years ago. I thought we were changing the world." Deja felt a chill run down her spine. "Did you say Marcus?" Alexander nodded. "Marcus Blackwood." "Why?" "My brother's name is Marcus," Deja said quietly. "He's been struggling with addiction for years. I've learned that sometimes the people we love most are capable of hurting us the deepest." "Where is he now?" "Your brother?" "Rehab, hopefully. He disappears for weeks at a time, then shows up asking for money or a place to stay. It breaks my grandmother's heart every time." Deja's voice grew quiet. But I never stop hoping he'll get clean, that he'll come back to us. Alexander looked at her with newfound respect. You're incredibly strong, Deja. I don't know how you do it. Same way you do it, she replied. One day at a time. One decision at a time. Outside, the storm was beginning to subside, but the emotional tempest between them seemed to be intensifying. Deja found herself drawn to this broken, mysterious man who had stumbled into her world. There was something about his vulnerability, his raw honesty, that called to something deep inside her. Can I ask you something? Alexander said suddenly. Sure. Do you believe in second chances? Deja considered the question carefully. I believe in the possibility of redemption, she said finally. I believe that people can change, that mistakes don't have to define us forever. But I also believe that second chances have to be earned. Alexander nodded slowly. I've made a lot of mistakes in my life, Deja. I've been so focused on success, on building something meaningful, that I forgot to pay attention to what was happening right in front of me. Like what? Like the fact that I haven't had a real conversation with another human being in months. Like the fact that I can't remember the last time I felt genuinely connected to someone. He paused, looking directly at her. Until tonight. Deja's heart skipped a beat. There was something in his eyes, an intensity, a longing, that made her breath catch. Alexander. I know it sounds crazy, he continued, his voice growing more urgent. I know we just met, and I know I'm probably the last person you should be talking to right now. But sitting here with you, talking to you, it's the first time in years that I've felt like myself. Before Deja could respond, her phone buzzed with a text message. She glanced at it and felt her heart sink. It was from her grandmother's neighbor, Mrs. Chen. Deja, your grandmother had another episode. She's asking for you. I have to go, Deja said, her voice tight with worry. My grandmother. Is everything okay? Alexander asked, immediately sobering. I don't know, Deja said, grabbing her purse and jacket. She's been having these episodes lately, where her blood sugar drops dangerously low. I need to get home. Let me drive you, Alexander said, standing up despite his unsteady state. You're in no condition to drive, Deja replied, but there was gratitude in her voice. Then we'll call a cab. Together. Deja looked at him, this stranger who had somehow become something more in the span of an hour. Why would you do that? Because, Alexander said simply, you showed me kindness when I needed it most. The least I can do is return the favor. As they prepared to leave the diner, Deja couldn't shake the feeling that this was more than just a chance encounter. There was something about Alexander Sterling that felt like destiny, like the universe had conspired to bring them together at exactly the right moment. But she had learned the hard way that fairy tales rarely came true for girls like her. The question was, would she be brave enough to believe that this time might be different? The taxi ride through the rain-slicked streets was tense with unspoken worry. Deja sat rigidly in the back seat, her phone clutched in her hands as she tried calling her grandmother with no response. Alexander sat beside her, his earlier intoxication replaced by sharp concern as he watched her growing distress. Turn here, Deja directed the driver, pointing toward a narrow street lined with modest row houses. It's the blue one with the white porch. As they pulled up to the small house, Deja could see Mrs. Chen waiting on the porch, her elderly frame silhouetted against the warm glow of the porch light. The sight of her neighbor's worried expression made Deja's stomach drop. Keep the meter running, Alexander told the driver, then turned to Deja. Go. I'll wait here. No, Deja said firmly, surprising herself. Come with me. Please. Alexander looked uncertain. Are you sure? I don't want to intrude. You're not intruding, Deja said, already opening the car door. I don't want to do this alone. They hurried up the walkway together, Mrs. Chun meeting them halfway. She's stable now, the older woman said in her accented English. But she was very confused, kept asking for someone named Marcus. Deja's heart clenched. That's my brother. She always asks for him when she's scared. The paramedics wanted to take her to the hospital, but she refused. Said she couldn't afford it, Mrs. Chun continued. She's inside resting. Alexander's jaw tightened at the mention of medical bills, but he said nothing as they entered the small, tidy house. The living room was filled with the warm scent of lavender and the soft glow of table lamps. Family photos covered every surface. Pictures of a young Deja with her parents, graduation photos, and countless images of an elegant woman with kind eyes and silver hair. "Deja, baby, is that you?" came a weak voice from the bedroom. "Yes, Grandma, I'm here," Deja called back, rushing toward the voice. Alexander hung back in the living room, feeling like an intruder in this intimate family moment. But as he looked around at the modest home, he was struck by something he rarely encountered in his world: genuine warmth. Despite the obvious financial struggles, there was love in every corner of this house. "Who's this handsome young man?" came the voice again, stronger now. Deja emerged from the bedroom, her face flushed with relief. "She wants to meet you," she said to Alexander. "She heard your voice and, well, she's curious." Alexander followed Deja into the small bedroom, where he found himself face to face with one of the most dignified women he had ever met. Eleanor Washington sat propped up in bed, her silver hair carefully arranged despite her recent health scare. Her eyes, the same warm brown as Deja's, studied him with sharp intelligence. "So you're the young man who made sure my granddaughter got home safely," Eleanor said, her voice carrying the musical cadence of the South. "I'm Eleanor Washington. And you are?" "Alexander Sterling, ma'am. It's an honor to meet you." Eleanor's eyebrows rose slightly. "Sterling? As in the Sterling Foundation?" Alexander's surprise was evident. "You know about the foundation?" "Child, I may be old, but I'm not blind. Your foundation built the community center 3 blocks from here. My book club meets there every Thursday." Eleanor's eyes sharpened. "Which makes me wonder what the head of a major charity foundation is doing in Murphy's Diner at midnight, looking like he's been through a war." Deja shot her grandmother a warning look, but Eleanor continued studying Alexander with the intensity of someone who had learned to read people through decades of experience. "It's been a difficult night," Alexander said carefully. "I imagine it has," Eleanor replied. "Sit down, young man. Both of you. Deja, get this man some water and something to eat. He looks like he hasn't had a proper meal in days." As Deja bustled around the small kitchen, Alexander found himself alone with Eleanor. The older woman's gaze never left his face. "You know," Eleanor said quietly, "I've lived long enough to recognize when someone's world is falling apart. The question is, what are you going to do about it?" Alexander was quiet for a long moment. "I'm not sure there's anything I can do. The damage might be too extensive." "The damage to your foundation, or the damage to your soul?" Eleanor asked pointedly. The question hit Alexander like a physical blow. "Both, I suppose." "Then you're looking at this all wrong," Eleanor said firmly. "When a building has termites, you don't tear down the whole structure. You eliminate the termites and rebuild the parts that were damaged. But the foundation, the real foundation, that stays strong." Deja returned with a plate of leftover cornbread and a glass of water. "Grandma, you should be resting." "I'm fine, baby," Eleanor said, though Alexander could see the exhaustion in her eyes. "Besides, I think this young man and I needed to have this conversation." "What conversation?" Deja asked, settling into the chair beside the bed. "About second chances," Eleanor replied, looking directly at Alexander. "About what it means to rebuild something beautiful from the ashes of betrayal." Alexander felt something shift inside him. "Mrs. Washington, I don't know if I'm strong enough for that kind of rebuilding." "Strength isn't about what you can carry alone," Eleanor said gently. "It's about knowing when to ask for help. And sometimes, help comes from the most unexpected places." She glanced meaningfully at Deja, who was looking between her grandmother and Alexander with growing curiosity. "Grandma, What are you talking about? Deja asked. But before Eleanor could answer, Alexander's phone rang. He looked at the caller ID, and his face went pale. It's Marcus, he said. Don't answer it, Deja said instinctively. I have to, Alexander replied. If I don't, he'll know I'm on to him. He answered the phone, putting it on speaker at Eleanor's insistent gesture. Hello, Marcus. Alex, man, where are you? I've been trying to reach you all night. You missed the gala, and people are asking questions. Alexander's voice was steady, but Deja could see his hands shaking. I'm fine. I just needed some air. Well, you need to get back here. We have a situation with the foundation accounts. Someone's been asking questions about the disbursements from last quarter. Eleanor's eyes widened, and she looked at Alexander with new understanding. Deja felt her stomach drop as she realized what they were hearing. What kind of questions? Alexander asked. The kind that requires immediate attention. We need to meet first thing in the morning to discuss damage control. Alexander closed his eyes. Marcus, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. Are you stealing from the foundation? The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. Then, Marcus's voice returned, different now, colder, more calculating. Alex, I think you've been drinking too much. You're not thinking clearly. Let's discuss this in person. Answer the question, Marcus. Another pause. Then, I think this conversation is over. But Alex, be very careful about what accusations you make. You have a lot more to lose than you think. The line went dead. Alexander stared at the phone, his face ashen. Well, Eleanor said quietly, I'd say that answers your question. Deja reached over and took Alexander's hand. I'm sorry, she said softly. He just threatened me, Alexander said, his voice hollow. My best friend, my business partner, just threatened me. What are you going to do? Deja asked. Alexander looked at her, then at Eleanor, then back at Deja. I don't know. If I expose him, it'll destroy everything we've built. The foundation helps thousands of people. But if I don't? If you don't, you become complicit in his crimes, Eleanor finished. And more importantly, you lose your soul. Alexander stood up abruptly, pacing the small room. You don't understand. This isn't just about money. The foundation is my life's work. It's the only thing I've ever done that mattered. No, Deja said firmly, standing to face him. It's not. What? The foundation isn't your life's work. Helping people is your life's work. The foundation is just one way you've chosen to do that. But it's not the only way. Alexander stared at her, something shifting in his expression. You really believe that? I believe that sometimes the most important thing we can do is start over, Deja said. Build something new, something clean, something that can't be touched by the corruption of the past. Eleanor smiled from her bed. Listen to her, son. She's got more wisdom in her little finger than most people have in their whole bodies. Alexander looked between the two women. This grandmother and granddaughter, who had somehow become his anchor in the storm of his collapsing world. But how? How do you start over when everything you've built is tainted? You find people you trust, Eleanor said simply. People who believe in the same things you do. People who will help you build something better. Alexander's phone buzzed with a text message. He looked at it, and his face went white. Marcus is freezing all the foundation accounts. He's locking me out of my own company. Deja felt her heart race. Can he do that? He's the CFO. He has the authority to claim financial irregularities require immediate action. Alexander sank back into his chair. He's moving faster than I expected. By morning, he'll have complete control. Then we don't wait until morning, Eleanor said, her voice strong despite her frail appearance. What do you mean? Alexander asked. Eleanor's eyes were bright with determination. I mean, my boy, that sometimes the best way to fight fire is with fire. And sometimes the most powerful weapon against corruption is the truth. As the words sank in, Alexander felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Hope. But with hope came fear, because he was beginning to realize that exposing Marcus would require him to trust these two women with not just his secrets, but his future. The question was he ready to bet everything on a waitress and her grandmother, who had shown him more genuine care in one night than he had experienced in years? The answer, he was beginning to realize, might determine not just the fate of the foundation, but the fate of his own soul. The next morning arrived grey and drizzling, matching the somber mood that had settled over Eleanor's small house. Alexander had spent the night on the living room couch, unable to return to his penthouse apartment, knowing that Marcus was likely already moving to consolidate his control. Deja had called in sick to work for the first time in 2 years, determined to help Alexander navigate the crisis that was rapidly spiraling out of control. 47 missed calls, Alexander said, staring at his phone as he sat at Eleanor's kitchen table. 17 from Marcus, the rest from board members, employees, and journalists. Eleanor poured him a cup of coffee, her movements deliberate despite her age. "The wolves are circling," she observed. "Question is, are you going to run or are you going to fight?" "I don't know how to fight someone who has all the weapons," Alexander replied, his voice heavy with exhaustion. Deja emerged from the bedroom, where she'd been helping her grandmother sort through medications. She had changed from her diner uniform into jeans and a simple sweater, her hair pulled back in a ponytail. Alexander found himself struck by how beautiful she looked in the morning light, even in the midst of his crisis. "What if he doesn't have all the weapons?" Deja asked, settling into the chair across from him. "What do you mean? You said Marcus has been stealing from the Foundation for years. There has to be evidence, right? Paper trails, bank records, something that proves what he's been doing." Alexander nodded slowly. "There would be, but he controls all the financial records. He's the one who would have covered his tracks." "But not perfectly," Eleanor interjected. "Men like that, they get cocky. They think they're smarter than everyone else, so they leave breadcrumbs without realizing it. Even if that's true, I don't have access to those records anymore," Alexander said. "He's frozen me out of everything." Deja's phone buzzed, and she glanced at it with a frown. "It's my manager at the diner. He wants to know when I'm coming in." She looked at Alexander. "I should go to work. You need to figure this out, and I'm just—" "Don't," Alexander said quickly. "Please don't go." The intensity in his voice surprised all three of them. Deja felt her heart skip a beat at the raw need in his eyes. "I need you here," Alexander continued, his voice softer now. "I know I don't have the right to ask, and I know you barely know me, but you're the only person I trust right now." Eleanor watched the exchange with keen interest, noting the way her granddaughter's expression softened at Alexander's words. "You trust me?" Deja asked quietly. "More than anyone else in my life," Alexander replied. "You and your grandmother showed me more genuine kindness in one night than I've experienced in years. If I'm going to rebuild my life, I want to do it with people who understand what integrity actually means." Deja felt something warm spread through her chest. "Okay," she said simply. "I'll stay." Alexander's phone rang, interrupting the moment. The caller ID showed Marcus's name, and Alexander's jaw tightened. "I have to answer this eventually." "Put it on speaker," Eleanor suggested. "Let's hear what he has to say." Alexander answered the call, his voice carefully neutral. "Hello, Marcus." "Alex, thank God. Where have you been?" "I've been worried sick." Marcus's voice was smooth, concerned, but Alexander could hear the underlying tension. "I needed time to think," Alexander replied. "Well, I hope you've had enough time, because we have a serious situation here. The board is asking questions about last night's no-show, and there are rumors circulating about financial irregularities." Alexander's eyes met Deja's across the table. "What kind of rumors?" "The kind that could destroy everything we've built," Marcus said. "Which is why I've taken the liberty of implementing emergency financial protocols. All accounts are temporarily frozen while we conduct a full audit. You froze me out of my own foundation, Alexander said, his voice deadly calm. I froze everyone out, Alex. It's standard procedure when there are questions about financial impropriety. You should know that. What I know is that you've been stealing from the foundation for years, Alexander said, watching Deja's eyes widen at his boldness. The silence on the other end of the line stretched for what felt like an eternity. When Marcus finally spoke, his voice was different, colder, more calculated. Alex, I think you need to be very careful about what you're saying. You're making accusations that could have serious legal consequences. For whom? Alexander asked. For you, Marcus replied smoothly. You're the face of the foundation, Alex. You're the one who signs off on all the major decisions. If there are financial irregularities, guess who the authorities are going to look at first? Deja saw Alexander's face go pale, and she reached across the table to grasp his hand. His fingers were cold, trembling slightly. You're setting me up, Alexander said quietly. I'm protecting us both, Marcus replied. But I can only do that if you're smart about this. Meet me at the office in an hour. We'll discuss how to handle this situation properly. And if I don't, then you'll be dealing with this alone. And Alex, you really don't want to be alone in this. The line went dead. Alexander stared at the phone, his face ashen. He's been planning this for months, Alexander said quietly. Maybe years. He's positioned himself as the responsible financial officer, trying to clean up irregularities, and me as the reckless figurehead who wasn't paying attention. But you weren't reckless, Deja protested. You were focused on the charitable work. Try explaining that to a jury, Alexander said bitterly. Or to the media. Or to the thousands of people who trusted the foundation with their donations. Eleanor had been listening quietly, but now she leaned forward. Son, can I ask you something? Of course. In all your years of working with Marcus, did you ever suspect anything? Any red flags, any moments where something didn't feel right? Alexander considered the question carefully. There were times when the numbers didn't quite add up, when expenses seemed higher than they should have been. But Marcus always had explanations. He's incredibly smart, charismatic. He could make you believe anything. And the board? Did they ever question anything? Marcus handpicked most of the board members. They're all wealthy donors who trust him implicitly. Alexander's voice grew more dejected. I'm realizing now that I was effectively pushed out of the financial side of my own organization years ago. Deja felt a surge of anger on Alexander's behalf. There has to be something we can do. Some way to prove what he's been doing. Even if we could prove it, the damage to the foundation would be catastrophic, Alexander said. The people we help, the schools, the water projects, the scholarship recipients, they'd all suffer. So what's the alternative? Deja asked. You let him destroy you to save the foundation? Alexander was quiet for a long moment. Maybe that's the right thing to do. Maybe my reputation is a fair trade for keeping the foundation operational. That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard, Eleanor said sharply, surprising both Alexander and Deja with her vehemence. Mrs. Washington. Don't Mrs. Washington me, young man. You think letting a thief and a liar take control of a charitable organization is somehow noble. You think the people that foundation helps want their assistance to come from dirty money. Alexander flinched at her words, but Eleanor wasn't finished. You want to know what's really noble? Fighting back. Exposing the truth, even when it's difficult. Building something new and clean from the ground up. But how? Alexander asked, his voice plaintive. I don't have the resources, the connections, You have something more valuable than any of that, Eleanor interrupted. You have the truth, and you have people who believe in you. She gestured to Deja, who was looking at Alexander with fierce determination. I believe in you, Deja said quietly. I've seen who you really are, Alexander. I've seen your heart, your integrity, your genuine desire to help people. That's worth fighting for. Alexander felt something shift inside him, a spark of the determination that had driven him to start the foundation in the first place. But where do we even begin? We begin with what we know, Eleanor said practically. We make a list of everyone who might have information, everyone who might have seen something suspicious. We start building a case. And while we're doing that, Deja added, we start planning what comes next. Because you're right, even if we expose Marcus, the foundation as it exists now might not survive. But that doesn't mean the work has to stop. Alexander looked at her with growing amazement. You're talking about starting over completely. I'm talking about starting better, Deja corrected. Building something that can't be corrupted, can't be stolen, can't be destroyed by one person's greed. That would take years, Alexander said. And I don't have any funding, any infrastructure. You have something more valuable, Eleanor said with a smile. You have a reputation for integrity that Marcus hasn't been able to destroy yet. And you have passion for the work. And you have us, Deja added, her voice soft but firm. Alexander felt his heart skip a beat. Deja, I can't ask you to. You're not asking, she said, reaching across the table to take his hand again. I'm offering. We're offering. Alexander looked at their joined hands, then at Eleanor's encouraging smile, and felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Hope mixed with something deeper, something that made his chest tight with possibility. There's something else, Deja said hesitantly. Something I should probably tell you. What? I have a degree in accounting. I was working toward my CPA before. She gestured vaguely around the modest house. Before life happened. I might not have access to the Foundation's records, but I know how to read financial statements. I know what to look for. Alexander stared at her. You're an accountant? Was. AM. I don't know. Deja's cheeks flushed. I've been working at the diner for 3 years, trying to save money for my grandmother's medical bills. But I never stopped thinking about numbers, about patterns, about how money flows through organizations. So you could help me understand what Marcus has been doing. I could help you prove it, Deja said, her voice growing stronger. And more importantly, I could help you build something better. Something transparent, something accountable. Alexander felt a rush of emotions, gratitude, excitement, and something else, something that made him want to reach across the table and kiss this remarkable woman who had appeared in his life like a miracle. But before he could act on any of these impulses, his phone rang again. This time, the caller ID showed a number he didn't recognize. Mr. Sterling? This is Detective Rodriguez with the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit. We need to speak with you immediately about irregularities in the Sterling Foundation accounts. Alexander's blood ran cold. Marcus wasn't just trying to take control of the foundation. He was actively trying to frame Alexander for his crimes. And judging by the timing of the call, his plan was already in motion. The question was, would Alexander, Deja, and Eleanor be able to prove his innocence before Marcus succeeded in destroying everything Alexander had worked for? The FBI office felt sterile and intimidating, its fluorescent lights casting harsh shadows across the grey walls. Alexander sat across from Detective Rodriguez, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s with greying hair pulled back in a severe bun. Deja sat beside him, her presence both comforting and surprising to the detective, who had expected Alexander to arrive with a team of lawyers. Mr. Sterling, Detective Rodriguez began, opening a thick file, we've received credible information suggesting significant financial irregularities within the Sterling Foundation. According to our preliminary investigation, approximately $2.3 million in charitable donations have been diverted to unauthorized accounts over the past 18 months. Alexander's hands clenched in his lap. Detective, I need you to understand something. I believe my business partner, Marcus Blackwood, has been systematically embezzling from the Foundation without my knowledge. That's an interesting theory, Rodriguez replied, her tone neutral. However, According to our records, you signed off on all the major financial decisions during that time period. I signed documents that Marcus prepared, Alexander said, his voice strained. I trusted him to handle the financial details while I focused on the charitable programs. That's a rather convenient arrangement for someone who wanted to claim ignorance later, Rodriguez observed. Deja leaned forward. Detective, may I ask who provided you with this information? Rodriguez studied Deja carefully. And you are? Deja Washington. I'm an accountant helping Mr. Sterling review his financial records. I see. And what exactly have you found in your review? That's just it, Deja said, her voice steady despite the intimidating environment. We haven't been able to review anything. Mr. Blackwood has frozen all the foundation accounts and restricted access to all financial records. Why would he do that if Mr. Sterling is innocent? Because, Alexander said, his voice growing stronger, he's covering his tracks while simultaneously positioning himself as the responsible party trying to clean up my supposed mess. Detective Rodriguez made notes in her file. Mr. Sterling, I need to ask you directly. Did you authorize the transfer of foundation funds to personal accounts? No, absolutely not. Did you authorize the creation of shell companies designed to obscure the movement of charitable donations? Alexander's face went pale. Shell companies? What shell companies? Rodriguez slid a document across the table. These shell companies, all registered in your name, all funded with foundation money. Alexander stared at the paperwork, his hands shaking. I've never seen these before. I didn't create these companies. I didn't authorize these transfers. Yet your signature appears on all the incorporation documents, Rodriguez pointed out. Deja reached for the documents, studying them with a practiced eye. Detective, may I ask when these companies were registered? The earliest one was registered 14 months ago. And when were these signatures supposedly executed? Rodriguez checked her notes. The dates on the documents span from 14 months ago to as recently as last week. Deja's eyes sharpened. Mr. Sterling, where were you last Tuesday evening? I was at the foundation offices until about 6. Then I went to dinner with some potential donors. Why? Because according to this document, you were supposedly in Delaware last Tuesday, signing incorporation papers for something called Sterling Solutions LLC. Rodriguez looked between them with growing interest. You have receipts for this dinner? I paid with my credit card, Alexander said. And there were 6 other people there, including the mayor's wife. That's easily verifiable, Rodriguez noted, making another note in her file. There's something else, Deja said, studying the signatures more closely. These signatures are good, but they're not perfect. Look at the way the S in Sterling is formed here versus here. She pointed to 2 different documents. The pressure is different, the angle is slightly off. You're suggesting the signatures are forged? Rodriguez asked. I'm suggesting that someone has been practicing Mr. Sterling's signature for months, perfecting it for exactly this moment. Rodriguez leaned back in her chair. Ms. Washington, you seem to know quite a bit about financial fraud for someone who claims to be just helping out. I have a degree in accounting from Temple University, Deja replied calmly. I've been working in the service industry for the past few years, but I've kept up with financial crime trends. Why haven't you been working in accounting? Deja's jaw tightened slightly. Personal reasons. Family obligations. Alexander felt a surge of protectiveness toward Deja. Detective, are you questioning her credentials or her character? I'm questioning everyone's credentials and character, Mr. Sterling. That's my job. Rodriguez's phone buzzed, and she glanced at it. Excuse me for a moment. I need to take this call. She left the room, and Alexander turned to Deja. You didn't have to reveal your background. You could have stayed anonymous. I'm not ashamed of my education, Deja said quietly. I'm ashamed that I haven't been able to use it to help my family more effectively. You're using it now, Alexander said softly. You're using it to help me, and I can't tell you how much that means. Alexander, Deja said, her voice hesitant. There's something else. Something I noticed in those documents that I didn't want to mention in front of the detective. What? The bank account numbers. I recognized the routing number on 2 of these shell company accounts. Alexander felt his pulse quicken. From where? From the Foundation's legitimate accounts. Marcus has been using the same bank, probably the same branch, to set up these fake companies. That means there's a paper trail, and more importantly, there are bank employees who might remember him. But would they talk to us? They might not talk to us, but they'd have to talk to the FBI. Rodriguez returned to the room, her expression more serious than before. Mr. Sterling, I've just received some additional information that I need to share with you. What kind of information? We've been in contact with Mr. Blackwood. He's provided us with what he claims is evidence of your knowledge and involvement in the financial irregularities. Alexander's blood ran cold. What kind of evidence? Email communications between you and him, discussing the need to move money quickly to avoid detection. Phone records showing calls between you at times when these transfers were being executed. That's impossible, Alexander said. I never sent emails like that. Yet the emails came from your Foundation account. Marcus has access to my Foundation account, Alexander said desperately. He could have sent emails from my account to his own. That's another interesting theory, Rodriguez said. However, Mr. Blackwood has also provided us with audio recordings of conversations between you two. The room fell silent. Alexander felt like the walls were closing in on him. I'd like to hear these recordings, Deja said firmly. Rodriguez looked at her with surprise. Ms. Washington, this is a federal investigation. We don't typically share evidence with. With what? With the accused accountant? With someone who might be able to identify inconsistencies in the supposed evidence. Rodriguez considered this for a moment, then pulled out a small digital recorder. This is a brief excerpt from one of the recordings Mr. Blackwood provided. She pressed play, and Alexander's voice filled the room. Marcus, we need to move the money quickly. The auditors are getting suspicious, and I don't want this to blow up in our faces. Then Marcus's voice. I understand, Alex. I'll take care of the transfers tonight. But you need to make sure you're not connected to this if anyone asks questions. Alexander's face went white. I never said that. I never had that conversation. Yet it's your voice, Rodriguez pointed out. Deja leaned forward. Can you play that again? Rodriguez replayed the recording, and Deja listened intently. There's something wrong with the audio quality, she said. The background noise is different between the two voices. And the tone, it doesn't sound like a natural conversation. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting that with today's technology, it's possible to splice together audio clips from different conversations to create something that sounds like a single conversation. Rodriguez raised an eyebrow. That's a very sophisticated accusation. It's a very sophisticated frame job, Deja replied. Someone has been planning this for months, maybe years. They've been collecting signature samples, voice samples, creating fake companies, establishing a paper trail that leads directly to Mr. Sterling. And you believe this someone is Marcus Blackwood? I believe Marcus Blackwood is the only person who had access to everything he would need to create this elaborate deception. Rodriguez was quiet for a long moment. Ms. Washington, if what you're suggesting is true, then Mr. Blackwood has committed multiple federal crimes in addition to the original embezzlement. Yes, Deja said simply. He has. But it would also mean he's been planning to frame Mr. Sterling for a very long time. Alexander felt a chill run down his spine. How long? If he's been collecting voice samples and signature samples for months, then he's been planning this since before he even started stealing, Rodriguez said. Which means the theft was never the end goal, Deja finished. The theft was just the means to an end. The real goal was always to destroy Alexander and take complete control of the Foundation. The room fell silent as the full implications sank in. Alexander felt like he was going to be sick. "Detective," he said quietly, "I need you to understand something. Marcus Blackwood isn't just my business partner. He's been my best friend for 15 years. He was the best man at my wedding. He was there when my wife died. He's been like a brother to me." "Which makes him the perfect person to destroy you," Rodriguez said gently. "He knows your habits, your weaknesses, your blind spots. He knows exactly how to manipulate you." Alexander looked at Deja, then back at Rodriguez. "What happens now?" "Now we investigate," Rodriguez said. "We dig deeper into these shell companies. We analyze the audio recordings. We trace the money trail. But Mr. Sterling, I have to warn you, until we can prove your innocence, you're still a person of interest in this investigation." "And Marcus?" "Mr. Blackwood is currently being treated as a cooperating witness. But if Ms. Washington's theory is correct, that status could change very quickly." As they prepared to leave the FBI office, Alexander felt like his entire world had been turned upside down. Not only had his best friend betrayed him, but he had been planning that betrayal for years, systematically building a case against Alexander while pretending to be his closest ally. "Deja," he said as they walked toward the elevator, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me." "Of course. Are you absolutely certain you want to be involved in this? Because it's about to get much worse before it gets better." Deja stopped walking and turned to face him. "Alexander, let me ask you something. Do you believe I'm the kind of person who would abandon someone I care about when things get difficult?" "I barely know you," Alexander said softly. "We met less than 24 hours ago." "Then let me tell you who I am," Deja said, her voice strong and clear. "I'm someone who believes in justice. I'm someone who believes that good people deserve to have someone fight for them. And I'm someone who believes that sometimes the most important thing we can do is stand up to bullies, even when they're powerful, even when they're dangerous." She paused, her eyes never leaving his. "And I'm someone who's falling for a man who has the courage to rebuild his life from scratch rather than compromise his integrity." Alexander felt his heart stop. "Deja, I'm not asking you to feel the same way," she said quickly. "I'm just telling you that I'm not going anywhere. We're going to prove your innocence, we're going to expose Marcus, and then we're going to build something beautiful together. I have to ask, have you ever had someone believe in you when you couldn't believe in yourself? How did that change your life? Share your story in the comments below." As they stood in the hallway of the FBI building, Alexander realized that Marcus's betrayal, devastating as it was, had also led him to something he had never expected to find: a woman who saw his true worth and was willing to fight for it. But as they would soon discover, Marcus's plan was far more elaborate than either of them had imagined. And the worst was yet to come. 2 months had passed since that rainy night at Murphy's Diner, and Deja's world had been turned upside down in ways she never could have imagined. The woman who once struggled to pay her grandmother's medical bills now lived in a penthouse apartment overlooking the city, courtesy of Alexander Sterling, the man she had fallen deeply, irrevocably in love with. But tonight, as she stood in the marble-floored lobby of Sterling Foundation's headquarters, clutching a manila envelope that contained evidence that would destroy everything, Deja felt more alone than she had in years. The elevator doors slid open with a soft chime, and Alexander stepped out, his face lighting up when he saw her. Even now, after everything they had shared, her heart still raced when he smiled at her like that, like she was the most precious thing in his world. "Deja, what are you doing here so late?" he asked, crossing the lobby in quick strides. "I thought you were having dinner with your grandmother tonight." "I was," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. But then Marcus showed up. Alexander's expression immediately shifted to concern. Deja's brother had been in and out of their lives over the past few months, his addiction creating chaos whenever he appeared. "Is he okay? Do you need me to?" "Alexander, stop." Deja held up her hand, and something in her tone made him freeze. "We need to talk." She led him to his office, her heels clicking against the polished floor with each step. The silence between them was deafening, heavy with the weight of what she was about to reveal. Alexander closed the door behind them and turned to face her, his blue eyes searching her face. "What's wrong?" he asked gently. "You look like you've seen a ghost." Deja almost laughed at the irony. In a way, she had. "Marcus brought me something tonight," she said, holding up the envelope. "Something he found when he was going through some of his old things." Alexander's face went pale. "What kind of something?" Deja's hands trembled as she opened the envelope and pulled out a photograph. It was old, slightly faded, but the image was clear enough. Two young men in college graduation robes, their arms around each other's shoulders, grinning at the camera. One was Alexander, younger but unmistakably him. The other was Marcus. Not her brother Marcus, but Marcus Blackwood, Alexander's former business partner. But that wasn't what made Deja's blood run cold. Standing between them, her hand on Marcus Blackwood's arm, was a woman Deja recognized immediately. A woman with the same dark skin, the same bright smile, the same distinctive birthmark on her left cheek. Her mother. "Alexander," Deja whispered, her voice breaking. "How did you know my mother?" Alexander stared at the photograph, his face cycling through emotions. Surprise, recognition, and then something that looked like grief. "Deja, don't lie to me," she said, stepping back from him. "Not now. Not about this." Alexander sank into his chair, running his hands through his hair. Her name was Diane Washington. She was Marcus's girlfriend in college. They were in love. Were? Deja's voice was sharp. "Alexander, my mother died when I was 12. She and my father were killed in a car accident." "I know," Alexander said quietly. "I was at the funeral." The words hit Deja like a physical blow. She stumbled backward, her hand reaching for the wall to steady herself. "You were what?" "I was there in the back. I didn't think it would be appropriate to approach you and your grandmother. You were just a child, and you were grieving, and I." He looked up at her, his eyes filled with pain. "I was grieving too." "This doesn't make sense," Deja said, her mind racing. "If you knew my mother, if you were at her funeral, then that means you knew who I was. That night at the diner, you knew who I was." "No," Alexander said firmly, standing up and moving toward her. "I swear to you, Deja, I had no idea. You look so much like her, but it had been over a decade. I thought my mind was playing tricks on me." "But you figured it out," Deja said, her voice growing colder. "At some point, you put the pieces together." Alexander's silence was answer enough. "When?" Deja demanded. "When did you realize who I was?" "When I met your grandmother," Alexander admitted. "She had pictures of your mother on her nightstand. That's when I knew for certain." Deja felt like the floor was crumbling beneath her feet. "That was 2 months ago, Alexander. 2 months ago, and you said nothing." "I was trying to protect you," Alexander said desperately. "I didn't want you to get hurt." "Protect me from what?" Deja's voice was rising now, anger and betrayal warring in her chest. "From the truth? From knowing that the man I've fallen in love with has been lying to me from the beginning." "I never lied to you," Alexander said. I didn't know how to tell you. You didn't know how to tell me that you knew my mother? That you were at her funeral? That you've been carrying around the guilt of her death for 14 years. Alexander's face went white. "What are you Deja pulled out another piece of paper from the envelope. A police report that Marcus had somehow obtained. "The accident that killed my parents," she said, her voice shaking. "It happened on December 15th, 2009. The same night as your college reunion. The same night that Marcus Blackwood drove drunk and hit their car head-on." The silence that followed was deafening. Alexander stared at the report, his hands trembling as he read the details. "Deja, I didn't know. Marcus Blackwood was your best friend," Deja continued, her voice growing stronger with each word. "He was driving drunk, and he killed my parents, and you covered it up. You helped him avoid prosecution. You gave him money to disappear, and then you built your precious foundation on the blood money of my parents' death. That's not what happened, Alexander said, his voice breaking. Yes, Marcus was driving that night. Yes, he was drunk. But I didn't help him cover anything up. I didn't even know about the accident until months later, when he told me he was leaving the country. He said he couldn't live with what he'd done. And you let him go, Deja said. You let him disappear instead of facing justice. I was 22 years old, Alexander said desperately. I was scared, and I didn't know what to do. By the time I found out, it was too late. The case had been closed, ruled an accident due to poor weather conditions. Poor weather conditions, Deja repeated bitterly. Not because your friend was driving drunk and killed 2 innocent people. I've lived with the guilt every day since then, Alexander said, tears streaming down his face. That's why I started the foundation. That's why I've dedicated my life to helping people. I was trying to make amends. Make amends? Deja's voice was incredulous. You think building schools and digging wells makes up for the fact that my parents are dead? That I grew up without them? That my grandmother had to raise me alone? No, Alexander said quietly. Nothing can make up for that. But I had to try. Deja stared at him, this man she had loved so completely, so trustingly. Is that why you helped me? Why you fell in love with me? Because you felt guilty? No, Alexander said fiercely. What I feel for you is real, Deja. It's the most real thing I've ever felt in my life. How can I believe that? Deja asked, her voice breaking. How can I believe anything you say when you've been lying to me from the beginning? Because you know me, Alexander said, reaching for her hands. You know who I am, who I really am. That night at the diner, you saw me at my lowest point, and you chose to help me anyway. You fell in love with me before you knew about my money, before you knew about my status. What we have is real. Deja pulled her hands away from his. What we have is built on a lie. You let me fall in love with you knowing that your best friend killed my parents. You let me trust you, let me believe that you were different, that you were good. I am good, Alexander said desperately. I'm not perfect, but I'm good. And I love you, Deja. I love you more than I've ever loved anyone. Love? Deja laughed bitterly. You don't know what love is, Alexander. Love is honesty. Love is trust. Love is not keeping secrets that could destroy the person you claim to care about. She moved toward the door, and Alexander followed her. Where are you going? Away from you, Deja said without turning around. Away from all of this. Deja, please, Alexander begged. Don't do this. Don't throw away everything we have because of mistakes I made before I even knew you. She turned to face him one last time, and Alexander saw something in her eyes that made his heart break. Not just anger or betrayal, but disappointment. The mistake isn't what you did before you knew me, Alexander. The mistake is what you did after you knew me. You had 2 months to tell me the truth, and you chose not to. You chose to let me live in a fantasy, while you carried the weight of reality alone. I was trying to protect you, Alexander said weakly. No, Deja said, her voice final. You were trying to protect yourself. You were afraid that if I knew the truth, I would leave. And you know what? You were right. With that, she walked out of his office, out of his building, and out of his life, leaving Alexander alone with the weight of his choices and the devastating realization that in trying to protect the woman he loved, he had lost her forever. As the elevator doors closed behind her, Deja allowed herself to cry for the first time since she had opened that envelope. She cried for her parents, for the truth she had finally learned, for the love she had lost, and for the girl who had believed in fairy tales long enough to let her heart be broken by a prince who turned out to be just another man carrying too many secrets. The city lights blurred through her tears as she walked out into the night, alone but finally free from the beautiful lie that had been her life for the past 2 months. She had no idea how she would rebuild, how she would go on, but she knew one thing for certain. She would never again let someone else's guilt masquerade as love. Behind her, in the Sterling Foundation building, Alexander Sterling sat in his empty office, staring at the photograph that had destroyed everything, wondering if redemption was possible for a man who had lost the only person who had ever truly seen him for who he was. The darkest hour had arrived, and neither of them could see a way toward the dawn. 2 weeks had passed since that devastating night at Sterling Foundation, and Deja felt like she was drowning in a sea of her own making. She had moved back into her grandmother's small apartment, sleeping on the same twin bed she'd occupied as a teenager, surrounded by the familiar scent of lavender and old books that had once brought her comfort, but now felt suffocating. Her grandmother, Nana Rose, had said nothing about the sudden change in circumstances. She had simply opened her arms when Deja arrived at her door with red-rimmed eyes and a single suitcase. But Deja could see the questions in her grandmother's eyes, the concern that deepened each day as Deja went through the motions of living without truly being alive. It was a Tuesday morning when everything changed. Deja was mechanically stirring her coffee at the kitchen table, staring out the window at the grey October sky, when Nana Rose placed a worn manila envelope beside her cup. "This came for you yesterday," her grandmother said gently. "I thought you might want to see it when you were ready." Deja looked at the envelope with suspicion. Her name was written across the front in unfamiliar handwriting, but there was no return address. "Who brought it?" "A young man. Said his name was Marcus. Not your brother Marcus, a different one. He looked troubled. Said it was important." Deja's heart stopped. Marcus Blackwood. The man who had killed her parents was here, in her grandmother's neighborhood, delivering letters. Her hands shook as she opened the envelope, pulling out several sheets of paper covered in neat handwriting. "Dear Deja, I know you have no reason to trust me, and I know that my words can never undo the damage I've caused. But I'm writing this because I can't live with myself anymore, and because Alexander Sterling is the best man I've ever known, and I'm about to destroy him the same way I destroyed your family. My name is Marcus Blackwood, and I killed your parents. I've been running from that truth for 14 years, but it's time I stopped running. Tomorrow, I'm turning myself in to the police. I should have done it the night it happened, but I was a coward. I was drunk, I was scared, and I let my father's money and connections sweep it under the rug. I let your parents become statistics in a police report instead of the beautiful people they were. But before I face the consequences of my actions, I need you to know the truth about Alexander. He's been carrying guilt that isn't his to carry, and he's about to lose everything because of my crimes. Alexander didn't know about the accident until 6 months after it happened. I had fled to Europe, and when I finally called him, broken and suicidal, I told him everything. He didn't help me cover anything up. He begged me to come home and turn myself in. When I refused, he cut all contact with me. For 5 years, Alexander tried to find me, tried to convince me to do the right thing. He hired private investigators. He worked with international law enforcement, but my family's money had made me untouchable. So he did the only thing he could do. He dedicated his life to making amends. Every school he built, every scholarship he funded, every life he saved through Sterling Foundation, it was all for your parents. He never told anyone, never took credit for the good he was doing. He just quietly, desperately tried to balance the scales of justice that I had tipped. I came back to the United States 3 months ago, not because I was finally ready to face justice, but because I wanted to destroy Alexander. I was jealous of his success, his goodness, his ability to live with purpose while I wallowed in self-pity. I started embezzling from the foundation, planning to frame him for my crimes. I wanted him to suffer the way I had been suffering. But then I saw you together. I followed him one night, planning to gather evidence for my frame-up, and I saw him with you. I saw the way he looked at you, the way you looked at him. I saw him smile for the first time in years, saw him laugh, saw him become the man he used to be before I ruined everything. And I realized what I had done. I had already taken your parents from you, and now I was about to take away the man you loved. I was about to destroy the only pure thing that had come from the wreckage of that night. I know you've left him. I know you discovered the truth about the accident, about my connection to both of you. But I need you to know that Alexander never lied to you about his feelings. He fell in love with you the night he met you, long before he knew who you were. And when he realized you were David and Diane Washington's daughter, it nearly destroyed him. He came to see me 2 months ago, after he figured out who you were. He was broken, desperate, asking me what he should do. Should he tell you the truth and risk losing you? Should he disappear from your life to protect you from the pain? I told him to stay quiet, to let sleeping dogs lie. I told him that telling you would only cause more pain. I was wrong. I was selfish. I didn't want my crimes exposed, and I convinced Alexander that protecting you meant protecting my secret. But secrets have a way of destroying everything they touch, and my secret has now cost Alexander the only happiness he's ever known. Asterisk. Tomorrow, when I turn myself in, the whole story will come out. Alexander will be cleared of any wrongdoing, but his reputation will be destroyed. Sterling Foundation will probably collapse. The man who has spent 14 years trying to atone for my sins will lose everything. Unless you can forgive him. I'm not asking you to forgive me. I don't deserve that, and I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make amends. But Alexander Sterling is a good man who made one mistake. He loved you too much to risk losing you to the truth. Your parents would have wanted you to be happy, Deja. They would have wanted you to love and be loved. Don't let my crimes take that away from you too. I'm sorry for everything I've stolen from you. I'm sorry for the childhood I took, the parents I killed, the love I nearly destroyed. But I'm not sorry that Alexander found you, and I'm not sorry that you found each other. In a world full of darkness, you two were each other's light. Don't let me extinguish that light too. Marcus Blackwood. P.S. The enclosed documents are the real financial records from Sterling Foundation. Alexander never stole a penny. Every dollar I embezzled, I've documented here. I'm prepared to testify to this in court. Deja read the letter 3 times, her hands trembling more violently with each pass. Tears streamed down her face as the full weight of Marcus's confession settled over her. Alexander hadn't betrayed her. He had been trying to protect her, just as he'd said. And in 2 weeks, she had let her pain and anger blind her to the truth. "Nana," she whispered, her voice breaking, "I think I've made a terrible mistake." Her grandmother sat down beside her, taking her hands in her weathered ones. "What kind of mistake, baby?" "I left him," Deja sobbed. "I left the man I love because I thought he had lied to me. But he was trying to protect me, and I was too hurt to see it. And now?" Nana Rose asked gently. "Now I don't know if it's too late. I said terrible things to him, Nana. I told him I didn't believe his love was real. I told him he was just like everyone else." Her grandmother was quiet for a long moment, studying her granddaughter's face. "Deja, honey, let me tell you something about love. Real love isn't about being perfect. It's about being human. It's about making mistakes and finding your way back to each other." "But what if he can't forgive me?" Deja asked. "What if I've hurt him too badly?" "Then you'll have learned something important about the cost of pride," Nana Rose said simply. "But if you don't try, you'll never know what might have been. And that's a regret you'll carry forever." Deja looked at her grandmother, this woman who had raised her with such wisdom and strength. "What would you do, Nana?" "I'd fight for love," her grandmother said without hesitation. "I'd fight for it with everything I had, because true love doesn't come along very often. And when it does, it's worth fighting for." Deja stood up abruptly, her decision crystallizing in her mind. "I have to go to him. I have to tell him I'm sorry, that I understand now." "Then go," Nana Rose said, smiling for the first time in weeks. "But Deja..." "Yes. Don't just apologize. Fight for him. Fight for your love. Show him that you're not just sorry. Show him that you're ready to build something real together, something that can withstand the storms that life will inevitably bring. As Deja grabbed her jacket and headed for the door, she felt something she hadn't felt in 2 weeks. Hope. Marcus Blackwood might have taken her parents from her, but he had also given her the truth she needed to save her love. And she was going to fight for Alexander Sterling with everything she had. The turning point had arrived, and for the first time since that devastating night, Deja believed that love might be stronger than the forces trying to tear them apart. But first, she had to find him, and she had to hope that it wasn't too late. Deja's heart pounded as she stood outside Alexander's penthouse apartment, her finger hovering over the buzzer. She had tried his office first, only to be told by security that he hadn't been in for a week. The Sterling Foundation building looked different somehow. Darker, with several floors mysteriously empty and an air of uncertainty that hadn't been there before. She pressed the buzzer and waited. No answer. She tried again, holding it longer this time. Still nothing. "Please be home," she whispered to herself, pressing the button a 3rd time. "Please don't let me be too late." The intercom crackled to life, but instead of Alexander's voice, she heard an unfamiliar woman's voice. "Can I help you?" "I'm looking for Alexander Sterling," Deja said, her voice shaking. "It's important." "I'm sorry, but Mr. Sterling isn't available right now. If you'd like to leave a message." "Please," Deja interrupted, desperation creeping into her voice. "My name is Deja Washington. I need to speak with him. It's about Marcus Blackwood." There was a long pause, then the sound of muffled conversation. Finally, the door buzzed open. Deja rode the elevator to the penthouse, her mind racing. Who was the woman who had answered? What was Alexander doing that made him unavailable? As the elevator doors opened, she was greeted by a middle-aged woman in a crisp business suit. "Ms. Washington, I'm Catherine Morris, Mr. Sterling's attorney," the woman said, extending her hand. "I'm afraid Alexander is indisposed at the moment." "What do you mean, indisposed?" Deja asked, stepping into the apartment she had once called home. The penthouse looked different. Boxes were stacked everywhere, and the warm, lived-in feeling she remembered had been replaced by the cold efficiency of someone preparing to leave. Her heart sank as she realized what she was seeing. "He's packing," she said, more to herself than to Catherine. "I'm afraid so," Catherine confirmed. "After Marcus Blackwood's confession yesterday, Alexander has decided to step down from Sterling Foundation and leave the city. He feels that his presence will only make it harder for the organization to recover from the scandal." "Marcus confessed?" Deja's voice was barely a whisper. "Yesterday morning, he walked into the police station and confessed to vehicular manslaughter in the death of your parents, as well as embezzling from Sterling Foundation. He provided extensive documentation proving Alexander's innocence in both matters." Deja felt the room spin around her. "Where is Alexander now?" Catherine hesitated. "He's in his study. He's been there for the past 18 hours, going through personal papers. Ms. Washington, I should warn you, he's not in good shape. The past few weeks have been difficult for him." "I need to see him," Deja said firmly. "I'm not sure that's a good idea." "Please," Deja interrupted. "I have something I need to tell him. Something that can't wait." Catherine studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Down the hall, last door on the right." "But Ms. Washington?" "Be gentle with him. He's been through more than any person should have to endure." Deja walked down the hallway, her footsteps muffled by the thick carpet. The door to Alexander's study was slightly ajar, and she could see him sitting at his desk, surrounded by stacks of documents and photographs. He looked like he had aged years in the 2 weeks since she had last seen him. She knocked softly on the door frame. "Alexander." He looked up, and the expression on his face nearly broke her heart. Hope, disbelief, and raw vulnerability warred in his eyes. "Deja, what are you doing here?" "I came to apologize," she said, stepping into the room, "and to tell you that I was wrong. About everything." Alexander stood up slowly, as if he was afraid sudden movement might make her disappear. How did you? Marcus sent me a letter, Deja said, pulling the envelope from her purse. He told me everything. The truth about the accident, about the embezzlement, about what you've been carrying all these years. Alexander's face crumpled, and for a moment, he looked like the broken man she had first met at Murphy's diner. I should have told you, he said. I should have been honest from the beginning. You were trying to protect me, Deja said, moving closer to him. You were carrying guilt that wasn't yours to carry, and you were trying to spare me more pain. But I hurt you anyway, Alexander said, his voice breaking. I saw the look in your eyes that night, Deja. I saw how much I hurt you. You didn't hurt me, Deja said, reaching out to touch his face. My pain hurt me. My anger hurt me. My inability to trust in what we had hurt me. But you loved me. Even when it was hard, even when it was complicated, you loved me. Alexander leaned into her touch, closing his eyes. I still love you, he whispered. I never stopped loving you. I know, Deja said, tears streaming down her face. And I love you too. I never stopped loving you either. They stood there for a moment, holding each other, both of them trembling with the weight of everything they had been through. Finally, Alexander pulled back to look at her. But how can we move forward from this? He asked. How can we build something real when our foundation is built on so much pain? The same way people have been building love for thousands of years, Deja said. One day at a time. One choice at a time. One act of faith at a time. But Marcus, Alexander began. Marcus made his choices, Deja interrupted. He chose to drink and drive. He chose to run away. He chose to embezzle from your foundation. But he also chose to confess, to tell the truth, to try to make amends. Those are his choices, Alexander. They don't define you, and they don't define us. Alexander shook his head. The foundation is ruined. My reputation is destroyed. I have nothing left to offer you. You have yourself, Deja said firmly. You have your heart, your integrity, your capacity for love. You have 14 years of good work, of lives saved, of hope given to people who had none. Marcus Blackwood can't take that away from you. But the foundation can be rebuilt, Deja finished. If that's what you want to do. But this time, we'll rebuild it together. We'll build it on a foundation of truth, of transparency, of genuine love for each other, and for the people we're trying to help. Alexander stared at her, and she could see the moment when hope began to replace despair in his eyes. You would do that? After everything that's happened? I would do anything for you, Deja said. I would build 1,000 foundations, fight 1,000 battles, face 1,000 storms, as long as I get to do it with you. What about your grandmother? Your job? Your life? My life is with you, Deja said simply. My grandmother knows that. She's the one who told me to fight for love, to fight for you. She said that true love doesn't come along very often, and when it does, it's worth fighting for. Alexander pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. I thought I had lost you forever, he whispered into her hair. You could never lose me, Deja replied, pulling back to look into his eyes. I might get scared, I might get angry, I might make mistakes, but I will always come back to you. Always. Even when I'm not perfect? Especially when you're not perfect, Deja said, smiling through her tears. Perfect people don't need love, Alexander. Broken people do. Flawed people do. People who make mistakes and try to do better. Those are the people who need love most. Alexander cupped her face in his hands, studying her as if he was memorizing every detail. I want to do this right, he said. I want to build something real with you, something that can weather any storm. Then let's start now, Deja said. Let's start with the truth, with honesty, with the promise that we'll face whatever comes together. I love you, Deja Washington, Alexander said, his voice strong and clear. I love your strength, your compassion, your ability to see good in people even when they can't see it in themselves. I love the way you saved me that night at the diner, and I love the way you're saving me again right now." "I love you too, Alexander Sterling," Deja replied. "I love your heart, your dedication, your willingness to carry the weight of the world on your shoulders. I love that you've spent 14 years trying to atone for someone else's mistakes, and I love that you're brave enough to build something new with me." They kissed then, a kiss that tasted of tears and hope, and the promise of new beginnings. It was a kiss that acknowledged the pain they had both endured, while celebrating the love that had survived it all. When they finally broke apart, Alexander rested his forehead against hers. "So what happens now?" "Now we face the world together," Deja said. "We rebuild Sterling Foundation. We help Marcus find his way to redemption. We support each other through whatever challenges come our way. We love each other, Alexander. We love each other, and we don't let anything or anyone tear us apart again. And if the scandal follows us, if people judge us for staying together despite everything, then we'll prove them wrong," Deja said confidently. "We'll show them what real love looks like. We'll show them that love isn't about being perfect. It's about being real, being honest, being willing to fight for each other no matter what." Alexander smiled, and for the first time in weeks, it was a smile that reached his eyes. "You know what I think?" "What?" "I think we're going to be okay. More than okay. I think we're going to be extraordinary." As they stood there in his study, surrounded by the remnants of his old life, Deja felt the truth of his words settle into her bones. They had survived the storm, weathered the darkness, and found their way back to each other. Now, together, they could face anything. The climax had passed, the resolution was at hand, and love, real, honest, fighting love, had won. 6 months later, Deja stood in the grand ballroom of the Sterling Foundation's new headquarters, her heart racing as she watched the crowd of donors, community leaders, and beneficiaries mingling beneath the crystal chandeliers. She smoothed down her elegant navy dress, a gift from Alexander that she had initially refused but eventually accepted when he explained it was for official foundation business. The transformation had been remarkable, not just in her circumstances, but in herself. The scared, exhausted waitress who had served coffee to a broken millionaire in Murphy's diner felt like a different person entirely. Now, as the director of community outreach for the Sterling Foundation, Deja had found her calling in ways she never imagined possible. "You look beautiful," Alexander's voice came from behind her, warm and familiar. She turned to find him approaching, impeccably dressed in a black tuxedo, his blue eyes bright with love and pride. "I still can't believe this is real," Deja said, gesturing to the room around them. 6 months ago, I was worried about making rent, and now you're about to announce the largest scholarship program in the Foundation's history," Alexander finished, taking her hands in his. "Deja, what you've accomplished, the way you've transformed our community programs, it's been extraordinary." Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, Deja could see the city lights twinkling like stars. Somewhere out there was Murphy's diner, still serving coffee to lost souls at midnight. But tonight, this moment, felt like the culmination of a journey that had begun with a simple act of kindness. "I have something for you," Alexander said, his voice suddenly nervous. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Deja's breath caught. "Alexander, I know this might seem fast," he said, his hands trembling slightly. "But these past 6 months have shown me what I've been missing my entire life. You've taught me about real love, about sacrifice, about what it means to truly care for someone else." He dropped to one knee right there in the middle of the ballroom, and Deja became aware that the room had grown quiet, that people were watching, that her grandmother, who had become like a second mother to Alexander, was crying happy tears from her wheelchair near the stage. "Deja Washington," Alexander said, his voice strong and clear, "you saved my life that night in the diner. You saw past my mistakes, my failures, my brokenness, and you chose to help me anyway. You've made me a better man, a better leader, and a better human being." He opened the box to reveal a stunning diamond ring that caught the light from the chandeliers above. I want to spend the rest of my life making you as happy as you've made me. Will you marry me? Tears streamed down Deja's face as she looked at this man who had become her everything. The scared, drunk stranger from that stormy night had transformed into her partner, her best friend, her soulmate. Together, they had rebuilt the foundation, exposed Marcus Blackwood's crimes, and created something beautiful from the ashes of betrayal. Yes, she whispered, then louder. Yes, Alexander Sterling, I will marry you. The room erupted in applause as Alexander slipped the ring onto her finger and pulled her into his arms. As they kissed, Deja felt the weight of all their struggles, all their fears, all their dreams culminating in this perfect moment. I love you, Alexander murmured against her lips. I love your strength, your compassion, your unwavering faith in the goodness of people. I love you too, Deja replied, her heart full to bursting. Thank you for showing me that fairy tales can come true. As they pulled apart, Deja caught sight of her grandmother, who was wiping tears from her eyes. The medical bills that had once seemed insurmountable were now a distant memory, thanks to Alexander's quiet intervention. Her grandmother's diabetes was under control, she had the best doctors, and most importantly, she was happy. Ladies and gentlemen, Alexander announced to the crowd, his arm around Deja's waist, I'd like you to meet my fiancée, the love of my life, and the woman who reminds me every day that the smallest acts of kindness can change everything. The crowd cheered, and Deja felt overwhelmed by the love and support surrounding them. She thought about the journey that had brought them here. The pain, the growth, the discovery that sometimes the most beautiful love stories begin in the most unexpected places. Later that evening, as the party wound down and the last guests departed, Deja and Alexander found themselves alone on the balcony overlooking the city. The storm from that fateful night seemed like a lifetime ago, replaced now by clear skies and infinite possibilities. Do you ever think about what would have happened if I hadn't decided to help you that night? Deja asked, nestled against Alexander's chest. Every day, Alexander replied, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. But I also think about how everything happens for a reason. You were exactly where you needed to be, exactly when I needed you most. And you were exactly what I needed too, Deja said softly. I just didn't know it yet. They stood there in comfortable silence, watching the city lights twinkle below. In the distance, Deja could see the neon sign of Murphy's Diner, still flickering faithfully in the night. Tomorrow, she would visit Jerry and the other staff, bringing them news of a new foundation program to provide healthcare benefits for service workers. The cycle of kindness would continue. I have one more surprise, Alexander said suddenly. Close your eyes. Deja obliged, and she heard the soft sound of music beginning to play. Their song, the one that had been playing on the radio during their first official date. She opened her eyes to find Alexander extending his hand. Dance with me, future Mrs. Sterling? As they swayed together under the stars, Deja reflected on how dramatically her life had changed. The scared, exhausted waitress had become a confident advocate for change. The lonely millionaire had found his purpose in love and service. Together, they had created something beautiful, not just their relationship, but a foundation that would help countless others find their own second chances. What are you thinking about? Alexander asked, sensing her contemplation. I'm thinking about how that night, I thought I was just helping a stranger get home safely, Deja said, smiling up at him. I had no idea I was actually helping him find his way to me. And I thought I had lost everything, Alexander replied, spinning her gently. But I had actually found the most important thing of all. As the music swelled around them, Deja felt a profound sense of gratitude wash over her. For the struggles that had made her strong, for the grandmother who had taught her compassion, for the moment of intuition that had led her to help a broken stranger, and for the love that had grown from that simple act of kindness. The future stretched out before them, bright with possibility. There would be challenges, certainly. Running a foundation, planning a wedding, building a life together. But Deja knew that whatever came, they would face it together, hand in hand, heart to heart. As they danced under the stars, with the city lights twinkling below and their entire future ahead of them, Deja Washington, soon to be Deja Sterling, knew that sometimes the most extraordinary love stories begin with the simplest decision to care for another human being. The drunk millionaire had found his way home. And in doing so, he had helped a kind waitress discover that home wasn't a place at all. It was the person you chose to love, and who chose to love you back, against all odds and beyond all expectations. Their story was just beginning. Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as interesting and even more intriguing than you ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.